rise. Circuit Court's now back in session. You may be seated.
We put Dr. Lazaro back on, Your Honor, proper question. Doctor, is psychopathy a mental illness?
No.
How would you characterize psychopathy?
It's a clinical construct. It's in the categories of personality disorders.
And is antisocial personality disorder a mental illness?
No.
Is that also in the construct of personality disorders?
Yes.
Can you describe how psychopathy is related to antisocial personality disorder?
Psychopathy is the most severe form of antisocial personality disorder.
What is borderline personality disorder?
It's another personality disorder in the cluster B category. So antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic and histrionic personality disorders are all within that cluster B, which is a theatrical personality style. Borderline personality disorder is characterized by multiple different types of symptoms, including intense interpersonal relationships, problems with a lack of sense of self, chronic suicidal ideation, identity disturbance, mood lability, and self-harm behavior, things like that.
What is the criteria for antisocial personality disorder?
Antisocial personality disorder, as I said, is a criminal personality type, where the very first criteria is that one that meets that disorder behavior does not conform to the laws and mores of society. They also have other different traits, including impulsivity, getting into physical fights, irresponsibility, those types of things.
Does one have to have antisocial personality disorder before you get to the next step of psychopathy?
Someone with psychopathy would meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, but it's not the other way around. So somebody could have antisocial personality disorder and never meet the criteria for psychopathy.
Does the defendant in this case meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder?
Yes.
Okay. Why is that?
Because he meets the criteria for the disorder.
And do you have specific examples that you could give to the court?
Yes, I can. I want to get to them if I can say exactly how. Antisocial personality disorder, one of the things that it needs is a precursor, which is conduct disorder. So you have to have criminal types of behaviors, impulsivity, fights, truancy in school, different types of those behaviors before the age of 15. So that's the initial criteria, which John meets. Then you only need 3 of the 7 criteria for it to meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, which number 1, John meets failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by performing acts that are ground for arrest. Number 2, deceitfulness, as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, he doesn't have that, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure, but he does meet the criteria because he does have deceitfulness, just not the aliases. Number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, yes, he meets that. Irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. Mr. Jonchuck has had multiple different assaults in his lifetime, not only personally, but also since he's been incarcerated and in the hospital. Reckless disregard for safety of self or others. John definitely meets that criteria. Number 6, consistent irresponsibility, as indicated by failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. John did have multiple different jobs, but he never really stayed at them long. And at the time of this murder, he had in his front pocket evidence of irresponsibility with Social Security disability payments for Phoebe. They were questioning what he was doing with them and he needed to get some evidence to support that he was using those responsibly. And the final criteria is the remorse, as indicated by being indifferent or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another.
Also, he has to be at least 18, correct?
Yes.
And evidence of conduct disorder with onset before age 15. Does he meet that criteria?
Yes.
How do you know that he meets that criteria?
There's evidence from his childhood and school reports that he's hurt other kids in school, also was disrespectful toward teachers, putting gum in one of the teachers' hoods of her outfit because he didn't like what she said or a rule that she demanded of him. He also had those problems growing up, which was one of the reasons why he started getting treatment in the first place, that he was so aggressive that people were wondering what was going on. So I know that his mom took him into treatment very early on, and they had done multiple different things, such as doing EEG to rule out seizures as a cause of that, and also did a tox screen on him when he was younger. Given his mom's history of drug use, they were afraid that she may have given him drugs or he may have had access to drugs due to her drugs. So he had those behaviors back then also.
And also, D says the occurrence of antisocial personality or antisocial behavior is not excessively during the course of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder.
Yes.
And he meets that criteria. Why?
Because I don't believe that he has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder.
What about borderline personality disorder? Does the defendant meet the criteria for that?
Yes.
Can you go through the criteria and tell us why he meets that?
Yes. And now, in borderline personality disorder, you only need 5 of the 9 criteria. And again, as I talked about earlier, that personality style is one that the person has a difficulty maintaining interpersonal relationships. They have a difficult time with a lack of sense of self. They tend to have a tendency to do self-harm behaviors. And that's, the very basis of this illness. John, I don't know that he would. Well, he does actually meet criteria 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. He had some issues with Phoebe's mother, Michelle, and that was one of the problems with their relationship, the basis of it. He thought she was cheating on him all the time. That caused him problems of fear of abandonment. He obviously also had issues with abandonment because of his mother being incarcerated several times during his life. So that's criteria number 1. Number 2, pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships, characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. John is a very social person. He's had multiple different relationships. I talked with a couple in terms of collateral data, but all of them in depositions as well as my interviews, they were all characterized by explosive episodes. Natasha Clare, he had issues with her mom. He would be screaming at her if she didn't come on time, or just very little of things. Melody Dishman, his best friend, they had issues all the time regarding money or different things like that. Amanda Serrano is another friend of his. They also had a very stormy relationship. And obviously his relationship with Michelle, Phoebe's mom, was extremely stormy, and there were a lot of issues there. So I would say he meets criteria 2. Criteria 3, identity disturbance, unstable sense of self. I believe John had that. He talks about that even in an interrogation room, where he said that he's always been different. And people with borderline personality disorder, they will say that. His mom describes that to me. His uncles described that to me, that John just really never understood exactly who he was. And that was also identified also in his sexuality a little bit, because he really didn't know what his sexuality was. And so that's a very classic symptom, actually, of that for criteria number 3. Criteria number 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging: spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving. He has all of those examples, actually, that's in the criteria. Binge eating, I wouldn't say, but obviously had some eating issues, because now he's much more fit, and he has definitely been managing that a lot better. I don't know about his eating habits, though, back then, but he certainly meets that criteria. Criteria 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, self-mutilating behavior. I know that there was one point when he was younger, as a teenager, he actually severed his tendon in his forearm with a knife in an attempt to basically get out of his living situation with his father. There was also another incident with Michelle where he had cut himself. I asked him specifically about that. I don't believe that he's ever had an actual suicidal ideation, but certainly it's had some gestures. Criteria number 6, affective instability due to marked reactivity of mood. That is something that people that know John speak about. It's also in hospital records. It was one of the bases for his incompetence, because they were concerned about him hearing negative information and how he would react. And so that is definitely meets that criteria, number 6. Number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. Again, a lack of sense of self. I believe that John does feel that way. At least at times he feels that way. Number 8, inappropriate intense anger, difficulty controlling anger. That was echoed in many different interviews, as well as in the hospital records. I mean, he attacked somebody for not getting an extra muffin on a Tuesday. That's an extreme reaction to something that's seemingly little, and that's one of the classic symptoms for borderline personality disorder. And finally, number 9, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. Certainly he was paranoid at times, but in this particular case, I think that he was paranoid partly because it was true. I mean, he was concerned that his people wanted to get Phoebe from him. His mom was straightening up her act, and she intended on getting custody of Phoebe. The uncle also wanted to get custody of Phoebe and had put in a Child Protective Service report as the basis of that. And certainly Michelle and her boyfriend at the time, Guy, had also wanted her as well, and they were pursuing that, and they told John that they were pursuing that. So I don't believe that it was out of the range of normal, the paranoia. Maybe his reaction to that was, but I don't think that it was psychotic in nature.
Were you present for Dr. Otto's testimony?
Yes. Well, I was via satellite, basically, yeah.
Did Dr. Otto also testify that he found features of borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder?
Yes.
So if you found that he met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, why didn't you diagnose him with those?
In my training, we are told to give the most encompassing diagnosis for the symptoms that we're seeing. And although I did see those, and although I did give those diagnoses in my mind, psychopathy encompasses all of those. So psychopathy is the most severe form of antisocial personality disorder, but psychopathy also encompasses a lot of personality, cluster B personality traits. So for me, when I looked at this, I gave the one diagnosis that I felt most accurately described what I was seeing. And that's how my training is.
What's a differential diagnosis?
A differential diagnosis is when we look at a case or a patient, we want to see all the different possibilities. And I usually put that in 5 different clusters. That's sort of how we look at it. Mood, anxiety, cognitive, psychotic, and substance use disorders. So I entertain all of those options when I'm doing these cases, as well as personality disorders, which is another.
Can you tell the court about your differential diagnosis in this case, your process as you went through it, and how you excluded different diagnoses?
Yes. When I looked at mood disorder, I know bipolar disorder is one concern, and certainly in Dr. Arthur's notes, he diagnoses him with bipolar 2 disorder.
Hold on, let me stop this. I think we're beyond the issue that we're dealing with. It just seems to me that Dr. Lazaro has somewhat refined her prior testimony to indicate that he suffers from borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. Are those DSM-5 diagnoses?
Yes.
I don't know that we have to keep going.
Okay.
I mean, you can if you want, but I don't know that we have to keep going into the rest of it now.
Okay. Can I go into a different part of it?
Sure.
Okay. So without going through your differential diagnoses completely, you found that the defendant is malingering in this case, correct?
Yes.
So my next question for you is malingering in the DSM?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the criteria for malingering?
Malingering is feigning or overproduction or false production of symptoms in order to get a secondary gain, whether it's money or, in this particular case, a legal issue. One of the criteria is a medical legal context for the concern, and this particularly is one of those. Number 2 is non-compliance with treatment or the interview. He had both of those for me, so that was criteria number 2. Criteria number 3 is over-exaggeration of symptoms, and definitely, in my opinion, he has that. And then number 4 is the presence of antisocial personality disorder.
How does antisocial personality disorder factor into the malingering diagnosis?
It's just one of the things that you need to look for and be suspicious of when you're looking at someone.
Why would you be suspicious that someone is malingering if they have antisocial personality disorder?
Because one of the criteria is deceit and lying.
In this case, did you see examples of the defendant's antisocial personality disorder and or psychopathy in your clinical interview with the defendant?
Yes.
Can you give us examples?
Of antisocial personality disorder?
In your interview, yes.
In my interview. He was not being honest in my interview. He was, even with information that it was easily, in collateral information, when I would confront him with certain inconsistencies in collateral information from what he was telling me, then he would have an automatic response to that, a slick response. Either I don't know, or what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Some kind of thing. What's the relevance of that question? That type of thing. Or he would know information around events, but whenever asked about a specific event, he didn't have information about that. He didn't know if he could potentially be culpable, but everything around that event he knew. So that's another one that's consistent with malingering or deception in that.
And how is antisocial personality disorder relevant to your opinion in this case of malingering?
Well, it's one of the criteria that you have to look at whenever you're addressing whether or not somebody has malingering.
And specifically in this case, did you observe examples of the defendant malingering facts in your clinical interview with the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. Do you attribute that to his antisocial personality disorder?
Yes.
Have a moment, Your Honor. That's all I have this time, Your Honor. Unless the court has any questions.
Yes.
When the state asked you whether or not Mr. Jonchuck in our previous hearing here an hour ago suffered from mental disease, defect, or infirmity, I believe your answer was no.
Yes.
Okay. And now your answer is yes.
Well,
Right? I mean,
personality disorders, some people do
hold on a
consider
second.
them that.
But now your answer is yes, he does.
If you consider personality disorder one, yes.
Okay. But why didn't you include that in your answer?
Because for the not guilty by reason of insanity, I don't believe personality disorders fit into that. At least that's been what I have been told in recent times. And that's been on and off, and I don't know that doctors are in agreement on that. Some people say if it's in the DSM, then it is a mental illness. Some people say personality disorders really don't meet that criteria. So it's hard for me to answer sometimes because I really don't know, because I don't believe that the psychiatric community is in agreement on whether or not it is.
Can I ask a follow-up, Judge?
Mm-hmm.
And under the old system, there were Axes 1, Axes 2 diagnoses, correct?
Yes.
Axes 1 would be mental illness,
The
right?
primary mental illnesses, yes.
And Axes 2 would be,
Have personality disorders and intellectual
and
disability.
they don't refer to them that way anymore, correct?
Correct.
Everything's in the DSM now?
Well, everything has been in the DSM, but just the classification now, they just put all the diagnoses all together. They don't separate them out into primary psychiatric diagnoses and then secondary and then medical problems. They don't do that anymore. They just put them all together.
So when I asked you, does he have a mental illness, how did you take that question to be?
Well, I take that to be if somebody has, well, at the time when you initially asked me that question,
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
my clinical characterization was psychopathy. And I know from my training that does not meet the criteria for mental illness for NGRI.
Okay. So because he doesn't have bipolar or schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, you would say he has no mental illness, correct?
Correct.
But does that mean that he doesn't have personality disorder or mental health problems.
No, that doesn't mean that.
Does that clear it up at all, Your Honor?
A little bit, and I have one more question. My understanding might be wrong. Would it be accurate to say that to give an opinion that somebody is not guilty by reason of insanity, you could not solely use a personality disorder to buttress that opinion?
Correct. Yes, that's right.
So we're kind of back to the same problem.
May I inquire, Judge?
Sure.
I have some arguments here when she's done with her question.
Okay.
Good morning, Dr. Lucero.
Hey, good morning.
You referenced some training you had, correct?
Yes,
The only time you've ever worked under the supervision of another psychiatrist looking at your work was your one-year fellowship, correct?
no, that's not correct.
All right.
Well, counsel, please.
Also overlap with other cluster B personality disorders such as borderline narcissistic or histrionic.
Okay. But personality disorder, borderline, antisocial, or some of these other ones, you wouldn't necessarily be high on the psychopathy scale.
That's right. They do not have anything to do with each other really, except for, the criminality aspect, but there's people that have all of these disorders, and they don't have psychopathy. Psychopathy is a very small portion of the population, very small.
Okay, come back.
All right, Dr. Lazaro, you wrote a report in the case, right?
Yes.
And you included a couple different times where you listed your diagnoses, correct?
I believe that I have one, well, I mean, yes, it's in there multiple different times, yes.
Looking at page 1, you indicate that it is your opinion within a reasonable degree of medical and psychiatric certainty that Mr. Jonchuck is a psychopath, correct?
Yes.
And then he also meets the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for sedative hypnotic use disorder, severe, correct?
Yes.
Stimulant, cannabis, alcohol, tobacco, and hallucinogen use disorder in full remission, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You agree you did not include antisocial personality there, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You agree you did not include borderline personality disorder there, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then you, next paragraph down, you indicate that you believe John is malingering his mental illness, correct?
Yes.
And that is because he is a psychopath who stands to gain something from lying, correct?
Yes, I say that in there.
And you then indicate that Mr. Jonchuck does not suffer mental illness that would render somebody insane, correct?
Yes.
Then later on in your report, you have another section actually titled DSM-5 Diagnoses, page 81 of your report, correct?
Yes.
And there you actually put a bullet, you have a list there. Number 1, you list psychopathy, correct?
Correct, but as we talked about, I believe in a deposition, that isn't really a DSM-5 diagnosis. I should have put that separate, but since I give that clinical characterization so infrequently, I didn't do that there, so that was my mistake.
Right. And you said you give the psychopathy diagnosis so frequently, right?
No, infrequently.
Okay. And we're going to go back to that.
Sure.
The malingering, you put that as a DSM-5 diagnosis?
Yes, it's a V code.
Could you point to me where it is in here?
Yes, do you have your
Yep.
copy? I don't know, pages are probably different, but it's under the V code section, other conditions that may be a focus of clinical attention.
And what page is that?
In my book, it is page 726, where it lists malingering.
$726. What?
I don't know if
think
your,
it's a hard copy.
that floppy book may have different pages than the hard book.
I'm sorry, 726?
It's on the very bottom. V code is V65.2, malingering, under the primary header, non-adherence to medical treatment.
Okay. So there is, so this section, to be clear, is titled other conditions that may be a focus of clinical conditions, correct?
Our clinical attention. They're causes for clinical concern. Yes.
Okay, conditions that may be a focus of clinical attention, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's subsets of that, correct?
I don't know what you mean by subsets, but
Well,
there are
there's-
many different V codes.
And there is non-adherence to medical treatment. Well, under problems related to access to medical and other health care, there is a subset for non-adherence to medical treatment, correct?
I don't know that that's contiguous. I'm taking them to be two separate entities, but
Do you disagree that they are laid out in an outline format in the book?
no, I don't disagree with that. There's different headers. That's a different header, and then the one under it, non-adherence to medical treatment, is a different header. But until you just said that, I guess I didn't even look at it as two of the same sections. I looked at it as two different sections. I believe non-adherence to medical treatment is a primary header, and I believe the problems with access to care is under problems related to other psychosocial, personal, and environmental circumstances.
Where's that?
Well, it's right ahead of that, so it's on the it's on the previous page. And then it goes on to other circumstances of personal history, then it goes on to problems related to access to medical and other health care. And those V codes are inaccessibility to medical treatment. And then the next one is non-adherent to medical treatment. So they're each different headers. I don't believe that one is under the other in the sense that I don't believe that that other one encompasses the non-adherence to medical treatment.
Okay. And it indicates that malingering differs from
Even if your blood sugar is under control, you still have diabetes. It's the same thing with substance use disorders. Once you get one of those disorders, that is continuous because it can always be, you can always relapse. So they continue to stay there. So it's not just in this one episode, it's his whole life.
All right, let's go to the antisocial personality disorder.
Okay.
You indicated that, well, first off, you do not get, in order to even find psychopathy as a specifier, we're looking at the alternative model of DSM, correct?
I'm not exactly sure even where you're going with that. There is a emerging section in the DSM where psychopathy is a specifier of antisocial personality disorder.
Right.
But in this particular case, I'm not saying it's a specifier of antisocial personality disorder. It supersedes antisocial personality disorder.
Oh.
It's its own entity.
Okay, where's that?
What do you mean, where is that?
Where in the DSM is it its own entity?
Psychopathy is not in the DSM-5.
Well, it is in the alternative model, correct?
No, it's just a specifier of antisocial personality disorder. It's not its own entity in the DSM-5.
It is only a specifier of antisocial personality in the alternative model, though, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so there's the actual model that is adopted by the APA, right?
Yes.
What is the APA?
American Psychiatric Association?
Are you a member?
No,
Why not?
because I don't agree with her.
Manual, this has, I don't know what this would have to do with the issue.
So there's an actual model that's been adopted, right?
Well, I mean, it's the DSM. I wouldn't say it's a model that's been adopted. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as an emerging level because, again, when you look at these manuals, as I don't know if you know, but it started out with just DSM, then it went to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's constantly the part of a subject of research. So what the DSM-5 authors did is they put a little section of, hey, sneak peek at what might come. That's what it is. It's not really anything other than that.
Okay, so then going to not the alternative model, the regular DSM.
Yes.
Psychopathy is nowhere in there, right?
No,
Okay.
no, it's not.
And then so psychopathy is mentioned as a specifier for antisocial personality in the alternative model, correct?
Is in this emerging section, yeah.
What is that emerging section called?
It's called Emerging Measures and Models.
Where are you looking?
I'm looking at the title page for it, section 3.
Okay, so that you're looking in the actual DSM.
Yes, I mean, I'm holding that book, yes.
Okay, so, and there you would agree then, under personality disorders, what's your page?
It doesn't have a page on that page. I'm not getting to any page. I just had the primary header page. It doesn't have a number to it. It just says section 3. There's no numbers on there.
You don't have I'm sorry, let me see again.
There's no page numbers on there.
What-
That's what you're asking me
What
for.
DSM is that?
This is the DSM-5.
What's the page number before it?
The page number before that, let me see. The page before that is 727.
Okay, so we're looking at the same section. Flip on the heading of the other pages is alternative DSM-5 model for personality disorders, right?
There is, on page 761, there is a section called Alternative DSM-5 Model for Personality Disorders, yes.
And that is where psychopathy is located, correct?
It is on page 765, under antisocial personality disorder. There's a specifier, and it says with psychopathic features.
All right, and so that is the only, are you saying that there is somewhere other than right there that psychopathy or the specifier for psychopathy is an option other than right there?
I'm trying to understand what you're asking me, because I never said that it was in the DSM-5, so you're asking me a question that I never gave the initial answer to.
Okay, so your belief is that it's not in the DSM at all?
Well, psychopathy, as the way that I have administered it here from the Hare psychopathy checklist, this is a distinct book from the DSM-5. It's not the same book. It was not included.
her.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because, right. So you're finished for now.
Oh, okay, so
Okay.
okay.
And I'll let you know somehow the state will when you're getting deposed.
Take your stuff for the moment, and we'll come back and we'll have to get rid of the bureau.
And if you have that, the stuff you were talking about, the Publix case with Judge Peters and all that, if it's relevant to this, give it to me so I can read it.
I mean, certainly the court thought it was relevant, it's in his order, but they're not insanity cases. Your Honor is saying you only want to see insanity cases.
For other issues, yeah, but I'll see what it says. If it's pertinent, let me read it so I know what you're talking about. Was his case an insanity case?
Yes.
Okay, well, let me read it.
Where Dr. Lazaro testified.
Okay. Let's bring the jurors in, please.
Yes, Your Honor.
You don't even need to sit. That way you won't have to get up. 1 o'clock. You're allowed to make any expression you like.
You still want
French.
12:55. Jury's at a hearing in court, Your Honor.
We're all very lucky we have that group of people. Okay, so what else do we need to do before 1 o'clock? And the depot will happen, and it will only be as to the change in her testimony, as to no mental illness versus antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. Okay? And then we'll come back at, well, I tell you what, let's come back at 12:30, and if the defense has any additional arguments they think they need to make as to the proffer, you can make them, and then we can start promptly at 1 o'clock.
Did I approach on the logistics of the depot?
That's what I was.
Okay.
We were quite curious about the
Just
logistics.
logistics of what we're gonna do instead.
Well,
And the fair.
if you're gonna do it in here, the press has to be out because the deposition is not a public record. Okay?
But the microphones are not being turned off. These.
Okay, well, they'll be turned off then.
Is there a way to do that? Gentlemen.
You understand my concern.